So this was just an awful time during that time. But in 1937, I joined the Hitler Youth. And of course, I loved sports. And one day we had sports in the afternoon, and another day in the week we had Nazification. And I would come home and tell the parents how wonderful Hitler is, and how they could stand that. Mother had to work.
They knew they had to. They had to be quiet.
Right. And Mother had to work. She was, because her child was 10 years old at that time. I was 10 in 37, and was close to the war in 1938 or 39. She had to work in the war industry. Well, my mother didn't want to go in a factory working online or something like that. We had some friends who had some screw factories in Munich, Germany. And they wanted to open a store in Nuremberg, and my mother ran that store. And she was really happy. We had a store for a long time before that, so Mother was used to, but not a screw store, but that was war industry, you know. And in 39, my father was trained to go to Norway. I'm saying that wrong. My father was trained as a food expert to take care of wherever the Nazis would take over, and he was going to take care of the, what's the matter? Something is
The cafeteria?
No, of the
supplies?
The army. It was,
okay.
You know, of the soldiers there that were stationed then wherever the Nazis took over. Well, in 1940, Norway was taken over, and he went to Oslo. And he worked as a civilian, as a food expert for the general, right? But he took care of the food supply of the Air Force.
Okay.
So that's what he was doing. So all of a sudden, Fadi was gone, and our food supply was getting worse. And my mother, on Sunday, would take a train ride out to the farms and walked from farm lady to see whether she could work a half a day. She wanted to be able to buy some potatoes. That's about the only thing she ever could buy. She didn't get it for nothing. She worked for them, but she bought, usually she came home with potatoes. Now we have something to eat again. She was so proud that she had potatoes. I never said that to Mother, but I thought, now we have potatoes, pepper and salt, and that was all, because we didn't have hardly any supply of any butter or anything like that. So, but Mother did have the potatoes ready always. She went to the farm, so she got some. So at this point, one day, my mother was in the, am I doing too much?
No.
I don't. At this point, honey, I couldn't think of the word Air Force. But anyway, my mother was in the store, and an officer comes in, and he wants a pound of these potatoes, pound of these screws, a pound of these screws, and finally Mother said, where is your requisition? You weren't able to buy war industry stuff without. He said, I don't need a requisition. And my mother said, oh yes you do. Well, he went out the door, slammed the door, and left. He was angry. He thought that dumb woman in there will give him the screws. And I always think he wanted to sell them on the black market, you know. But anyway, Mother thought that was the end of that, but it wasn't. Either the same day or the next day, and I don't exactly know when, the Gestapo comes in, interviewing my mother, trying to find out what actually took place, because that dummy reported my mother. He was wrong, mother was right. He went, the Gestapo is the Secret Service, and so my mother told them what happened, and then they finally let her go home again, and she was fine, she thought. But she sent a card to my father. You could send cards to whoever was on the front someplace. And the card said, Gestapo picked me up. And when my father got the call from his secretary, Helmut, your wife wrote a card, Gestapo picked me up. My father said, oh no, he thought to himself, what did she say? What did she do? Well, he went with the card to the general right away, showed the card to the general, and the general said, Helmut, you got to go home. Well, that was music to my father's ears. It was in 1941. I mean, in the middle of the war. So the general made sure he got home, and as my father always talks about it, as he walked out of the room, the general's office, the general said, wait a minute, Bormann, you never joined the Nazi party. My father smiled at him and he said, you kept me so busy, I didn't have time.
Your father was so smart.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, both of those two knew of each other, that they weren't Nazis.
Oh, really?
And I think my father told me some of that stuff after the war. My father never went into an office and said Heil Hitler. My father always had a book or a folder under his arms and he said Heil. And nobody really got him against this, but that's probably what but the general and my father, I don't think point blank ever told each other they're not, they didn't dare.
No.
They didn't, but they knew.
They knew.
So father comes home. I was 14 years old. Father comes home.
That's your clock?
They don't want us to forget the time. So father comes home and he said, I was still in school, of course. He said, Tina, what in the world is happening? What happened to you? She said, go to the Gestapo. Let them tell you. And they couldn't. He went to the Gestapo and said, General so-and-so sent me home from Norway. What are you doing with my wife? They said, we don't understand. They didn't know. That officer was wrong. I don't know whether they ever put him away. I do not know. But anyway, I come home from school. In the middle of the war, my father is home. I couldn't believe it. How could he be home?
Were you still in the Nazi youth at that time?
Oh, yeah. At that time, I was a Hitler Youth leader. I was 12 years old, and I had 10-year-olds but I'll talk about this in a few minutes. So my father is home when I came home from school, and he said, I couldn't believe he was home. Of course, I didn't know anything about that Gestapo thing. Mother didn't tell me. She knew I would be scared to death. So when he was home, Mother was still working in the store. He said, come on, let's sit down here. We'll have to talk about something serious. Sonja, you have been made to adore the most horrible creature in the whole world, Adolf Hitler. And I looked at him and he said, I'll tell you a few things he's doing and did to our country here. And then later on he said, you know what would happen to us I know, and I trust you, Fadi. I love you. And I did. My father was always very bright. I knew he wouldn't say to me anything. Then I said, how am I going to go and teach the 10-year-olds how beautiful Hitler is in the Nazis? My father said, I know you can do it. Well, but that, shortly after that, the bombs came, and there was no Hitler Youth meeting anymore. And Father went back up to Norway, of course, and we were sitting in the basement almost every night. Mother had her arms around me, the bombs were falling. All of a sudden, Mother would say, I have to go up and turn the potatoes off. I think that was the end of the detonation bombs. And she went upstairs to turn the potatoes off. And then she would get some ladies and saying, why didn't you come with me? Let's go up in the attic. The fire bombs are falling now. Maybe we can save the house. You know, we lived in an apartment building. So they went up. She never let me go up. She wanted me to be safe down in the basement. And they threw some fire bombs out so the house wouldn't burn down. Well, also, I forgot something completely that I didn't tell you. In our house where we lived, we had 2 Jewish doctors living there. One was married and had a son. He was my playmate. And all of a sudden he was gone. They told me they sent him to the grandparents. Well, they actually sent him to England to save him, you know. But my father was gone after we were singing songs in the late 30s, around at home when we were singing our songs. All of a sudden my father was, I think I'm going to take a little walk here. And I asked, Mother, why? Where is he going? He just went to the corner bar to have a glass of beer. Well, that wasn't it. He went 2 floors down and he sat with our Jewish neighbors and listened to BBC. British Broadcasting Company was absolutely fantastic in letting the Germans know what was really going on. Well, we never turned the radio on because my parents were afraid that I would say my daddy is listening to London, and that would have been the end of it, and I probably would have been one that would say that, and they knew that. So I forgot to mention that to you. One day he listened with our neighbors, our Jewish neighbors, and my father said, get out of here, get out of here. You see the handwriting on the wall. And he said, Helmut, we're Germans. We fought in the First World War. They're not going to do anything to us. My father said, don't trust them. Don't trust them. Send your son to safety first, but don't you trust them. Well, they sent the son, but they didn't leave, and then all of a sudden they were gone, and we didn't see them anymore. But that's why my father listened to BBC. But when he went to Oslo, he didn't have an apartment with the Germans. He wanted to live among the Norwegians and bought a radio and listened to BBC every night. It must have been horrendous for Father after he went back again, and then he heard that Nuremberg was being bombed continuously. In 1945, we were totally destroyed, the city of Nuremberg, and Father heard it on the radio up in Oslo, and we sent a card to him, lost everything, are alive, and that's all that mattered to my father. And that really was my life. But he did one very clever thing. While he listened to BBC and saw the the Americans were coming closer and closer, he sent a camouflaged letter. You never could send a regular letter. You had to camouflage because the Nazis opened letters all the time. He had a camouflaged letter to my mother saying, I want Sonja to have private English lessons immediately. And those mother followed through immediately. I majored in French, that was my main language, and the secondary was English. And I really didn't speak English that well. So mother took off immediately and I had private lessons. When the Americans came, I was fluent. And then they took over Nuremberg. The war crime tribunals were held in Nuremberg. And I actually got a job as a secretary to one of the judges on the war crime tribunals. And
wow.
That
So
was,
you really heard a lot of stories.
well, that it's, and Judge Harding, he was from Franklin, Ohio, of course he's not alive anymore, gave me very good recommendations when I came to this country that I got jobs right away. But Judge Harding is the one that sponsored my family.
Oh, really?
And I never asked him, and I didn't ask my father. He died in between, of course, and I should have, there were so many questions I would love to have my father,
Yeah.
but I didn't talk about it, so I didn't ask any questions. But he actually sponsored, but I think both of them, Judge Harding and my father, had some real good discussions about our immigrating to this country.